slow, Joe. President Biden knows he's older than the Magna Carta and dirt. But does he think it's a legitimate thing for voters to be concerned about his rusty faculties? Watch this.
I think it's a legitimate thing to be concerned about anyone's age, including mine. I think that's totally legitimate. But I think the best way to make the judgment is to watch me.
Deal. Let's watch.
I have not made that formal decision, but it's my intention. My intention to run again. And we have time to make that decision.
Dr. Biden is for it. Mr. President. Oh.
Dr. Biden thinks that, my wife thinks that we're doing something very important.
Oh, boy, there he is. Yeah, we should all have legitimate concerns about his age and the fact that every appearance he makes goes on to an ever-expanding blooper reel played nonstop by our enemies. You can hear them cackling about this doozy from Tehran to Tiananmen Square. It's no laughing matter because, as we've discussed many times before, our nation's power center is being held hostage by angry old people who have more power than functioning brain cells. It's not their age. It's the fact they're out of touch, impaired, and unready to cede the reins to the cognitively superior. When 82-year-old James Clyburn is the youngest person in House leadership, we got problems. Only 35% of respondents think the president is a strong leader, forte. And they're just being generous because they're delusional enough to think they'll score a cabinet post when he wins in 2024. 62% of respondents in a Fox News poll say the president is not a strong leader. They're right, and they're also being modest because they don't want to hurt the poor sniffer's feelings. Just 5 in 10 Dems want Sleepy Joe to nap his way to a second term. Similarly, 6 in 10 Republicans say they want a second Trump term. No, they don't. Let's have some newbies take a turn screwing up the country. The greatest generation are really only great at causing inflation, adding to the deficit, and blaming everyone else in the world but themselves. I blame the president, his fellow power-mad gummers, the media for dishonestly covering for him, and voters who gave him a pass because he wasn't Donald Trump. Turns out there's more than one way to screw a pooch, and this pup is in desperate need of a new guardian, and that's the memo. The median age of the Senate, 64 years young. That's the oldest in history. Yeah, people are tired of the cobwebs. Need more proof? Moments ago, President Biden called VP Kamala Harris president. Yeah, so why won't these dinosaurs just get the hell out of the way? The party panel has returned. Tom, Richard, and Olivia. See, Tom, it would be cute if he weren't so powerful. And, you know, people say, oh, someone else is in charge. There's a committee in charge. What if there's not?
Well, you know, I don't have a lot of respect for the office of the presidency. I know a lot of people do. I don't think it's that hard of a job. And I think everyone is kind of the same in terms of Joe Biden's ruining the country, but Obama was also ruining the country, and he's very competent. So I don't think it matters. Competence is overdone, and I think Republicans, I don't know if there's any consultants watching, but if you are, I would say the message is Joe Biden, competent enough to ruin the country.
Yes.
And I don't think if they want to run on this, oh, Joe Biden's incompetent, he may just go 3 years, drop out at the last minute, and then where is the narrative? It's not the candidate's incompetent. What if you get some young guy like Pete Buttigieg? He'd ruin the country, too. So it's Democrats bad, not Democrats too old.
Yes, so it's interesting because, you know, you make a good point. Presidents can do much more harm than good. That's the problem with the power concentrated in the presidency. But, Richard, you say it's not about the president's age because he's so hot. What is it about, Richard?
Listen, I think most folks who are getting ready to vote in this midterm elections, they're trying to figure out what candidate they're going to vote for. I sat down with one of those candidates a couple days ago, Mandela Barnes, who's running to be the second millennial in the Senate if he wins. Right now, there's only one millennial in the United States Senate, and that's John Ossoff. Right, and to your point, Kennedy, 53 of our U.S. senators are over the age of 65, and there's only one under the age of 36. So just think about that for a second. While millennials make up 33% of America's workforce, we have one member in the Senate. And if Mandela Barnes wins, he'll be the second millennial in the Senate. So
Well,
think about what
I
that means for policy.
I take issue with that. I think we need more Gen Xers. I think that millennials are baby lotion
Sure,
soft.
I'll take that too.
And I do not want Generation X to be overlooked by, it's like these narcissistic generational bookends that are going to ruin everything in different ways. So
I don't think it's millennials are narcissistic, but hey.
Yeah, they are. Oh my God, look at me, I'm AOC. La, 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 la. So, Olivia, is it about the president or is it about the system? What is wrong here?
A little bit of both. I honestly am one of those people who is wondering who's actually pulling the strings here, because it's clearly not Biden. And at this point, I do feel a little bit bad for him. I mean, this is if he was a CEO of a company, the board would have told him to retire and possibly take a job as a Walmart greeter at this point, because he's just clearly incompetent. But the system allows this, and I'm not sure if I support an age limit, but this is definitely making the argument for one.
Yeah, I don't think we need an age limit either. I don't, because as I've said many times, I race triathlon with people in their 70s and 80s, and they look great because they take care of themselves. I think this president is past the point where he can look after himself, and that is a real problem. And I don't care what party you're running with. I think that we need to have cognitive tests, psychological tests for anyone seeking the presidency, and not just people who've already gotten the nomination. I mean people going all the way through the primary process. If you are even flirting with the idea of being president, then you have to agree to take some sort of a cognitive and psych test, so as voters we can have a little bit more data on what we're really working with, because this whole thing, and I will go back and say Trump as well. I think they're both nuts. I know a lot of people really like President Trump's policies, but he has not aged well.